I'd like to say, first of all, that it's a great pleasure to be at this workshop. I feel privileged to be part of this thinking society. I'd like to thank Dan and the Elevate Group for hosting this event, and Sinead for really sort of reaching out and helping to coordinate this. I'm a political philosopher, so I come at this from a kind of a political and philosophical perspective, looking at the big picture and the institutional backdrop to the problems that we're confronting. The other day, I read about the arrest in November 2023 of a retired special constable by Kent Police based on something he tweeted, warning about the rise of anti-Semitism. One of the investigating officers was apparently recorded muttering very Brexity things in relation to literature in his home. And for me, this is just one more confirmation of the need for a workshop on critical thinking. If you're in this webinar, there's a good chance you've already started to sense structures of overbearing control in your society. David and Sinead will focus a lot on how we can free our mind from various forms of propaganda and behavioural conditioning. I will be providing a broader systemic perspective on this conditioning by uncovering the enslaving effects of a centralised state on our lives and how that enslavement is supported by a particular narrative, and a very seductive narrative. And in addition, I will be offering you a more empowering story about how we build a free and flourishing society together, based on my book, The Polycentric Republic, a theory of civil order for free and diverse societies. Because the stories we tell ourselves about our society and about our communities are dispositive, are decisive for how we live our lives and what we aspire to. And I'm hoping that maybe in the course of this workshop, as I talk about the narrative of the centralized state, that will become clearer. Now, in a nutshell, this is just a little sneak preview. The Polycentric Republic represents a shift away from top-down hierarchical social engineering models of order to bottom-up horizontal cooperation. So instead of a national state, think of a league of independent cities with far-reaching freedom of association. Or think of the difference between a tightly structured command and control military outfit and a local farmers market or jazz festival. In one case, you have coercion, tight hierarchical control, and that, for ordinary social activities, kills initiative and it kills trusting relationships. Loose, horizontal relations, guided by a broad framework of norms and values, which is what we need to get to, enable creativity and adaptation, and of course they enable freedom. So in this workshop I'll be focusing on how to move towards a more vibrant and liberating social order. We're taking this journey, right? We're taking a journey, a transformative journey, because we sense that there is something not right about the way our society is structured, the way it functions. And logic is not enough to get there, to get us to a better society, to get us to a freer society. And logic is not enough, because imagination basically frames our whole way of seeing the world. So think of the images that are salient for you in a meaningful life. What do you think of when you think of a free community? What do you think of when you think of order? You know, does the idea of an orderly community or public order conjure up for you the image of a police officer? Well, that's imagination. Or do you think of a jazz festival when you think of order? So if you don't free the mind, you will never be truly free, right? And if you don't free your imagination or feel free to expand your imagination and learn to expand it, if we don't, all of us, we need to learn to expand our imagination, because without a leap of imagination, we cannot move beyond the current paradigm, the current system that we live in. Without imagination, without the ability to imagine a better world, a different world, we'll just end up tinkering with the world we live in, tinkering with the institutions. Maybe we'll, for example, say, okay, I just want to get, a smart politician who's more or less shares my values to the top. I get that politician into power, and then that politician will kind of fix the system for me, or, will improve public policy and so on. And that would be a mistake. I mean, as a short-term solution, maybe electing a populist to power, or, someone who can appeal to the people and is intelligent, maybe it would work for certain issues. But if the problem is systemic, as I would suggest to you, and you'll have to think this through for yourself, obviously, but I'm going to propose that the problem is systemic. And if the problem is systemic with our political system, then putting a new person on the top of the system, chopping off the head and putting a new head in place is not going to fix our problems. Now, the imagination can be hijacked in different ways. And my colleagues have spoken to you about different forms of manipulation and conditioning. But in my studies, what I've found is that the legitimating ideology of the modern state and the imagery surrounding the state has dominated our imagination and has preempted our ability to think of other possibilities. For example, the myth of the social contract. So there's this idea that we somehow authorized a parliament, we authorized a political system and a government to take care of public order and to, represent our interests. So my question about that is, when did I sign this contract? Who offered me the contract, and when did I sign on the dotted line? I didn't sign the contract, and none of my friends, as far as I know, actually signed this social contract to basically empower an incredibly powerful central government to manage the affairs of my nation. And the second aspect of this ideology of the state, which is deeply problematic, is this idea that a centralized state is the only way to avoid chaos. That if we don't, give sovereignty to the parliament, if we don't give a kind of all-purpose general power to the government over a nation, then we'll just fall into chaos and anarchy. Our society will just fall apart. And that's, for hundreds of years, we've been told this by philosophers, by politicians. In one way or another, it's been in the air. But the fact of the matter is, there are other possibilities. There are systems that are not centralized and are not statist historically. And I'll give you an example. The Hanseatic League, a league of merchant cities in the north of Europe from around the 13th to 16th century, was a very stable alliance. And it was not a state, it was a league of cities. Another example, the Swiss Confederation is a bunch of regional units, regional political units that basically together govern through a federal government without creating a hyper-centralized state. So the myth of the social contract that authorizes this centralized state is simply false, and yet it shapes our imagination in so many ways. So what's wrong with this myth, and what's wrong with the imagination and the idea, the image of the overarching state that we have? Well, this ideology is dominated by enslaving, hierarchical and technocratic models of order and governance. It licenses, once you have the idea, once you accept the idea of this kind of overarching supervisory organ for society, you're licensing things like 15-minute cities, the micromanagement of universities, the micromanagement of farming methods, and so on. Many, many intrusive kind of regulations over society. So the way I see it is we have civil society and businesses and organizations, and they have their internal governance structures. And then we have this superstructure of the state and sometimes it's municipal governance as well, with intrusive regulations that in many cases disable local associations from working properly and from actually regulating themselves efficiently. So just to give you a little kind of humorous example, some friends of mine who are farmers, and basically, they told me that they have to locate their sheep at every moment. They have to have a geolocation for their sheep at every moment because of a directive from Europe and from the Spanish state. It sounds like the kind of thing that would come from Europe. But anyway, and I asked my friend, okay, so how does that help you be a better farmer? And he said, it doesn't help me be a better farmer. It doesn't help me do a better job or produce better food or anything like that. It's just I have to do it because I have to be compliant. So I could give you so many examples, but I don't have time, of these kinds of hyper-regulation, intrusive regulations that are really coming from a bureaucracy that doesn't really know what's going on the ground. Now, is there an alternative to the hierarchical top-down state? Yes, there is. The polycentric bottom-up republic. This comes from my book, The Polycentric Republic. I'm basing it on that. You don't have to agree with it, but just hear me out. I'll just lay out a few ideas. First, you have the idea of a league of independent cities with a largely self-regulating civil society. So a lot of autonomy in civil society organizations, associations, churches, and so on to run their own affairs. And political structures are federated through pacts, and so different cities and regions can actually packed into a shared constitutional order with a minimal overarching constitution. There's political mobility in which citizens can move around between different cities and regions and kind of shop around for a better political arrangement. And this creates a competitive environment in which taxes become more competitive, for example. And it empowers citizens through bottom-up and horizontal approaches to problem solving and governance. And so I'm just going to give a few examples. So there's an article called Patterns of Metropolitan Policing by Eleanor Ostrom, and Parks and Whitaker. And they conducted a study of 80 metropolitan areas in the US and found that smaller decentralized police departments were more effective and responsive to community interests compared to large centralized forces. And this was challenged and basically really challenged in a serious way the prevailing idea that if we consolidate and centralize, we'll get more efficiency. No, that was the prevailing idea. And this study really sort of took that apart and showed that it was false. Now, I guess I'm going to stop there because my time is running short, and just say that imagination is not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. We need to bring it down to earth. We need to forge a plan of action.